Hello, and welcome to the 25th ARC Industry Forum. We are delighted to have you with us today. We have held this forum in Orlando, Florida for the past 24 years. We are excited to bring this one right to you wherever you are. In fact, ARC is planning to host all future forums in hybrid format, where you will be able to attend in person or join us right from the comfort of your homes. This year's forum theme is accelerating digital transformation in a post-COVID world, a very appropriate theme for the times we are in. My name is Andy Chatha, and I will be your host for this session. Here are a few statistics about this forum. We have over 2,500 attendees registered, and more are registering every day, representing over 400 companies from nearly every major country around the world. Besides having many speakers from Americas, we also have speakers from Asia, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. We have over 7,500 corporate and media sponsors, as well as many press folks with us today. I want to show you a few features about the platform that we are using for this forum. And you are looking at the lobby where you entered the forum. You can attend any session you want by clicking on the auditorium. You can visit any of the sponsored booths by clicking on the exhibit hall. And you can network with sponsors, with speakers, as well as with other attendees by clicking on the networking tab. You can fill in your swag bag with the reports and videos from ARC as well as sponsors. And we encourage you to ask questions from the speakers and panelists by clicking on the Q&A button in the Zoom session. Here are a few tips for you to get the most value from this forum. Please shut down any other apps that you may have running. Join using computer audio because it gives you the best sound. And we want to encourage you to ask questions from the panelists by clicking on the Q&A feature in Zoom sessions. Here are a few of my comments about the past year. We learned that disruption can happen faster than we can imagine. Necessity is the mother of invention, as all of us had to learn many new tricks and technologies at home and at work. And no one is immune. But the impact can be very uneven from family to family, from country to country, from company to company. And we also have to change our priorities. We have to focus on more important, more immediate things and postpone other projects. We also learn that resets are possible and can be galvanizing. We definitely learn that we, the people, can rebound quickly. And most companies learned that they need highly engaged employees for faster innovation and higher customer satisfaction. With this, let's move on to our session. We have two speakers, and then we will dive into our panel discussion. And I definitely want to encourage you that please ask questions using the Q&A button in Zoom session.
Andy, you're muted.
Okay, now I would like to introduce our first speaker this morning, Nick Clausi, Vice President of Engineering at ExxonMobil. Nick's complete bio is in your app. Over to you, Nick.
Hey, good morning. It's my pleasure to be here representing ExxonMobil at this year's annual ARC Forum. And I'd like to express my gratitude to ARC for hosting this event and creating a venue where we can all get together and talk about the latest developments in the automation and digital space. By way of a brief introduction, my name is Nick Clausi. I currently serve as the Vice President of Engineering for ExxonMobil. I've been with the company for 22 years, and during that time I've had the privilege of working in a number of businesses, manufacturing facilities, and technical organizations throughout the corporation. In my current role, our engineering organization really has two primary missions. First is to provide technical support for our day-to-day operations, and second is to develop and ultimately deploy new technologies that advance our competitiveness. And to that end, our company's been on a digital transformation journey, probably not unlike many of the companies here today. And that journey has been really focused on leveraging the rapidly advancing digital capabilities, data analytics, and innovation to improve the performance of our people and our facilities. We've been actively working a large portfolio of programs, both short-term and longer-term. And today what I'd like to do is spend a little bit of time sharing with you some perspectives on what the past year has taught us about digital deployments and digital transformations, and then also link it to one of our more aggressive digital transformation efforts in the industry, which is the open process automation venture. Let's talk about 2020. I think it goes without saying that the COVID pandemic and the resulting disruption made last year one of the more challenging years in recent history. And that's probably a true statement across a bunch of businesses and industries. And while our digital transformation started long before 2020, the challenges of the past year really had a couple significant impacts on that journey. First, it materially accelerated the rate at which we were deploying digital technology. And secondly, it revealed value in those digital technologies that we didn't previously recognize. And so let me illustrate that with a few examples. And I'll start with accelerating deployments shown on the left side of the page. Before the pandemic hit, we had already started testing and using digital connectivity tools to perform remote support. So think of things like factory acceptance testing of equipment from suppliers or turnaround support at our facilities across the globe. In hindsight, though, our pace and the extent to which we deployed those tools was relatively incremental. And that was largely due to perceived risk that remote support might somehow not be as effective as in-person support. And what COVID did was it created the conditions that pushed us to test our limits. And what we learned was that we could do a lot more work remotely than we previously thought. And the time efficiency with doing that remote work or remote support allowed us to actually better leverage our technical resources to improve the coverage of those events that we were supporting remotely. Another example of pushing deployments was in the area of robotic inspections. During the pandemic, there was a premium on minimizing the number of people at our sites, as well as limiting the personal interactions in the field. And this helped drive the deployment of various robotic inspection techniques that we had currently under development. And once again, the realities of the pandemic served to push us past some of our hesitancy and the fears associated with new technologies. And the result was we deployed some of these technologies much faster than we would have without the pandemic. The second thing that we realized was uncovering value that we didn't previously recognize. And our Baton Rouge facility was a great example. It's home to the world's largest isopropyl alcohol unit. And isopropyl alcohol, or IPA, is a key ingredient in hand sanitizers and disinfectant sprays. And what we were able to do was leverage our remote connectivity tools with our advanced dynamic matrix control capability, and rapidly and remotely update control applications. And we did that in sync with physical modifications that we were making to the unit. And what this allowed us to do was very rapidly expand the production capability of that IPA unit. And that helped us meet what was really a step change in demand growth and meet a key societal need. The other example came in the area of remote machinery monitoring. We had just stood up a machinery monitoring group in one of our technical centers in Malaysia. And during Hurricane Laura, our Beaumont, Texas facility was working its way through an orderly shutdown in preparation for the hurricane. But they were doing that with a reduced number of engineers on site to manage COVID risk. And so we were able to utilize our remote monitoring capability to guide the site through the shutdowns. And they were able to observe critical machines in detail as they were being brought down. And the remote connectivity and visibility of the data allowed us to do engineering support during an abnormal operation from across the globe. In reality, the team in Malaysia was able to uncover vulnerabilities that ultimately could have compromised an orderly restart and address those vulnerabilities before the units came back up. So these are just a few fairly straightforward examples, but as we reflect back upon 2020, there really is a key lesson here for us. We tend to simultaneously overestimate the risk and underestimate the value of our digital technologies and transformation. And that's a really important lesson for all of us to keep in mind as we pursue some of those more challenging digital technologies and applications. So let's talk about some of those more ambitious programs. One of the areas where we see significant opportunity is in the space of autonomous operations and process control. In our manufacturing facilities, our operators are tasked with running fairly complex processes safely and efficiently around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they need to synthesize large quantities of data and manipulate potentially hundreds of variables to optimize an outcome. And that makes this a rich area to leverage digital technology. We're currently pursuing a fleet of opportunities through a venture that we call Intelligent Self-Optimizing Plant, or ISOP for short. And the goal here is to take advantage of cognitive learning and adaptive capabilities based on AI and machine learning to automate, reduce human error, and make better decisions. The slide here shows a few examples from that portfolio. I'll start on the left, where we're currently deploying a digital assistant for our operators that we call SmartLane. So SmartLane uses artificial intelligence to guide a console operator through an optimized transient event. And so a great example would be executing a grade switch on a reactor. So that real-time benchmarking and self-correcting guidance allows the operator to reduce off-spec material and avoid costly shutdowns and trips. This technology is already deployed on our polymer plants, and we're currently adapting it for other platforms as well across our fleet of facilities. Another good example in the middle here is a technology that we're actively piloting where we use video images for process control. The program uses mathematical models to interpret video images and translate them into signals that we can then use to monitor and ultimately control an operation. And this becomes particularly useful in areas where traditional instrumentation falls short. So think of things like monitoring the control of a flare, for example. The third example here on this page, and shown on the right, is something that's in the early stages of development. It's a virtual assistant for a console operator that we call Sophia. Sophia means wisdom in Greek. And the way to think of Sophia, it's like an Amazon Alexa, but designed for console operators. And so what it'll do is ingest and contextualize and mine data from various sources and then provide real-time answers to the challenging questions that an operator has in the day-to-day operation of a unit. So this is just a few examples of this opportunity-rich area. And we think that activities like this will have the potential of transforming the way manufacturing facilities operate across a number of industries. And while we're aggressively pursuing these programs, it's become pretty clear to us that the rate and pace of innovation like this is really limited by the current closed and proprietary-based distributed control systems that we operate. And we see a real opportunity for a step change in innovation by creating an open, standards-based, secure, and interoperable DCS architecture. And that observation is what ultimately drove the creation of the industry-led open process automation venture, or what we call the OPA program. The vision for OPA can be condensed down simply into unlocking the ability to take real-time control actions using the latest algorithms and integrating a growing source of plant data to drive value. To do this, it's going to require a platform that has a number of key features. First, the platform has to enable the use of application software from any supplier. Second, it needs to take advantage of low-cost access to all data types. Third, it needs to leverage state-of-the-art computing power at the industrial edge. And finally, it needs to be aligned upon industry standards to support security, interoperability, and also portability between components from different suppliers. Now, that sounds like a really bold idea, but it's really not new. Other industries like avionics and telecommunications have demonstrated the feasibility and the value of moving to open standards-based architectures. ExxonMobil engaged with the Open Process Automation Forum to facilitate the industry in developing the standards, which would be the basis for a next generation industrial control system. 3 years ago, my predecessor, Kenny Warren, spoke at this conference and laid out the vision for OPA. During that time, and since then, we've come a really long way. And I'd like to share in this page a few highlights from that journey. In 2020, after working on it for about 2 years, we completed the startup of an OPA prototype in our Clinton, New Jersey labs, where we converted one of our pilot units from a proprietary-based system to an OPA-aligned DCS system. The prototype integrated components from 10 different suppliers, and it successfully operated for 4 months through both routine and non-routine operations. The demo successfully demonstrated the concept could be executed. And it also reinforced the need for both hardware and software industry standards. In this past year, in 2020, we also started up our OPA test bed. It was developed by system integrator Yokogawa. The test bed, which contains hardware and software products from a variety of suppliers, is currently confirming readiness for both components and standards to support the system design for an eventual field trial. And then our next major step towards technical readiness is a field trial where we're going to put OPA system into one of our manufacturing facilities. Our plan right now is to move forward with that by year-end 2021. The timing will be driven by the readiness of the components and the standards. While we're really proud and encouraged by this progress, OPA was never intended to be an ExxonMobil program. Its success will be judged by the progress that we make as an industry. And I'm happy to note that the industry has been making quite a bit of progress over the past several years. To begin with, we've seen the membership in the OPA forum. It's grown to well over 100 companies, representing many industries, including oil and gas, petrochemicals, pharma, pulp and paper, just to name a few. You can see on the right, it's just a partial list of the members of the OPA forum. It's also exciting to see the number of testbed systems and demonstration units that have been announced and are progressing at our collaboration partners like BASF, Aramco, and Georgia Pacific. I'd really encourage you to participate in the OPA session this afternoon to hear more detail on that. Equally important, we're seeing a large number of hardware and software suppliers engaged in the forum, along with 5 major DCS suppliers. And so this is all really impressive progress. And I'd like to thank all of the current participants, collaborators, and suppliers who are engaged in the OPA program. The next steps are pretty exciting and also critically important. As I mentioned, ExxonMobil plans to conduct a field trial at one of our operating facilities, but a single field trial by one company is not enough. For OPA to succeed, we have to create a platform and market with critical mass to drive innovation. And we'll need a broad base of DCS users to not only test, but ultimately deploy systems to make that a reality. This seems like a big ask and a daunting task, but I'll connect back to some of my comments at the beginning of this talk. We often have the tendency to overestimate the risk and also underestimate the value of digital technologies. And I think that's going to be quite true for OPA. I think as we progress and once we're successful and we look back on this program, we're going to be really surprised at the value that it generates. And so I'd like to encourage all of the participants to keep up the pace and continue with your efforts, testing systems, and then ultimately in this next phase, deploying systems in your facilities. So just to conclude, I'd like to thank everybody again for all the progress on this program and also for the opportunity to share these thoughts with you as part of the ARC forum. I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion next. So thanks again.
Thank you very much, Nick. That was awesome. I'm very glad to hear that ExxonMobil is fully committed to OPA. I'm sure some folks in the audience are going to have some questions, more questions for you on this topic. Let's move on to our next speaker, Alan Nelson, Chief Technology Officer of ADNOC Group. Those of you who don't know ADNOC, it stands for Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. Our special thanks to Alan. It's quite late in the evening for him to be with us. Stage is yours, Alan.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our colleagues around the world. There is no question that today we're facing unprecedented challenges and opportunities at a pace that is unparalleled in recent memory. And the role of technology has never been more important to navigate the near-term challenges and future-proof our long-term strategies. The acceleration of digital and AI, as well as the amalgamation of digital with operational technology, is at the forefront of the technology discussion of nearly every company. This is true for ADNOC as well. I'd like to take the opportunity today to highlight how we frame the opportunity with technology and how we are leveraging digital and AI technologies to ensure business continuity and drive long-term value. Firstly, a brief background on ADNOC for those who may not be familiar. ADNOC is one of the world's largest and most sustainable energy producers. We are a primary catalyst of the growth and development of the UAE. We operate as a group of 14 integrated companies across the entire oil and gas value chain, from crude oil to gas to refined products. And we market our energy products around the world. We participate across the entire oil and gas value chain, from exploration and production to the trading of our products. And there are multiple opportunities to harness the power of digital and AI across the entire oil and gas value chain. For example, we use digital and AI to unlock new opportunities in the subsurface, optimize production capacity, compare historical and live data to enhance our drilling performance, monitor delivery against production targets, seamlessly link the subsurface with our surface operations, bring together processing and refining output with customer demand, manage inventories, procurement, and product delivery, track delivery of our cargo around the world, visualize manpower planning, and track and monitor health and safety performance. A holistic digital transformational journey will require advancements in all of these areas. And at ADNOC, we're focusing not only on one or two or three of these opportunities, but the entire ecosystem of digital and AI to enable the digital oil field and the digital refinery of the future. The Panorama Digital Command Center is the gateway to our digital transformation. It represents the single source of accurate and timely information across our entire value chain. Panorama streamlines and visualizes our entire operations and our critical business information on a single 50-meter video wall in one secure facility. It puts big data at the fingertips of our sharpest minds and enables us to uncover and recommend new pathways to optimize our assets and our infrastructure. The Panorama Command Center also enables us to have unique visibility across our businesses to facilitate faster and more informed decision-making. It helps us be more agile and responsive to production capacity, to customer needs, and to market dynamics. And if necessary, it also provides a centralized crisis management center with access to communications networks and live feed CCTV from across all our operations. Panorama was also a key enabler to ensure business continuity during the COVID-19 pandemic. In the face of the pandemic, we were, through Panorama, able to quickly create a group-wide real-time reporting and monitoring system of COVID-19 cases. This platform allowed us to track and to trace people and to effectively use quarantine and isolation measures to ensure the safety and well-being of our greatest asset, our employees and our contractors. Secondly, based on this reporting, we created an AI platform to predict COVID-19 cases and transmission across all of our facilities. This had the advantage of also allowing us to test the efficacy of different measures before implementing such solutions. This model has proven to be very accurate to control the transmission of COVID-19 and quickly became the backbone of our group-wide business continuity efforts and our decision-making. We regard partnerships as a major enabler of our 2030 smart growth strategy, and this certainly holds true for our digital and AI technologies as well. For example, in collaboration with Schlumberger, we have established a one-of-a-kind subsurface cross-disciplinary AI platform to enable the development of a master blueprint of our reservoirs. This platform completely transforms the way that we model our reservoirs and can shorten the field development planning cycle from years to months. This obviously has significant value potential, and applying this beyond the first successful pilot we did in 2020, we have the potential to create multiple billion-dollar value long-term. This platform is cloud-based and has an open architecture, which means we can keep building upon it and keep advancing it. This is a great example of how digital technology can change the way we work and enhance what our subsurface team can do. This technology was also recently recognized by winning the prestigious ADNOC Award in 2020. But importantly, digital and AI is not about replacing people. It is about enhancing what each employee can deliver. Another high-impact digital and AI project is our predictive maintenance project, which we established in partnership with Honeywell. This is one of the largest such programs in the industry, and we have already completed phase 1 of the rollout. And we're targeting all 2,500 pieces of rotating equipment across our entire value chain by the end of 2022. The system uses AI algorithms to predict critical equipment anomalies ahead of time and will allow us to completely change our maintenance philosophy. Through this, we expect to see cost savings of up to 20% on maintenance and also increase our machinery uptime by at least 10%. In addition, we should be able to predict and avoid critical failures well ahead of time, thereby avoiding major plant upsets. Another area is how we've been able to serve our shipping business. Today, we're applying AI tools on logistical data to improve decision-making and improve the efficiency of our operations. Through Panorama, we can track all ship movements in real time. And by combining this with digital twin geospatial tools, we can run advanced strategic scenarios to optimize our fleet. We're also supporting our trading and marketing business with blockchain and AI tools to enhance transparency, efficiency of documentation and accounting, and provide market intelligence to our trading business. For our retail company, ADNOC Distribution, we're in the process of creating a new convenience store concept, which we call ADNOC Go. These are unmanned stores powered by AI facial recognition tools. Registered customers can simply walk in, grab what they want, and leave. No checkout or payment process needed. The purchase is automatically linked and charged to the customer loyalty card or to their credit card. As a leading sustainable oil and gas company, we're also utilizing digital and AI to further enable our tracking and monitoring of our emissions. Since Panorama already enables real-time information from all of our operations across the value chain, we've added blockchain functionality to record and report all sustainability data across the entire group. This covers all areas of environmental, economic, and social data, and it is an industry first for such an application. This application creates immutable records, increases integrity and transparency, and provides an automated single source of truth for all of our sustainability data. And to further accelerate the deployment of our digital technology, we recently established a new joint venture with Group 42 called AIQ. The mission of AIQ is to create and deploy AI tools for the oil and gas industry that can be marketed and licensed to the global oil and gas industry worldwide. We believe this unique combination of ADNOC's domain expertise and decades of production data, with Group 42's expertise in AI modeling and supercomputing, can transform the rate of digital and AI deployment across the entire industry. Since establishing the joint venture, we are already expanding the scope of AIQ and recently entered into a strategic agreement with Group 42 Cloud Services and with Schlumberger Digital Platforms to accelerate the deployment of the solutions already developed by AIQ. I also wanted to highlight several additional digital and AI initiatives that we've implemented in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. One example is connected or smart workers. Connected or smart worker concept was, in a pre-COVID world, something that was viewed as nice to have, but the demand wasn't there from the businesses. Post-COVID, this view completely changed. Today, this is now something that the business is demanding, and we see great potential, value uplift, and most importantly of all, enhanced safety as a result. Some of the other areas we're working on right now also include proactive safety monitoring of personnel, early inspection efforts leading to reduced unplanned downtime, detection of unexpected behaviors, and real-time and onboard guidance as soon as an issue is detected. COVID-19 has taught the industry important lessons. To enable the massive step change in global development, our industry must think differently, embrace disruption, and harness the power of digital and AI solutions. This is exactly how we are responding at ADNOC as part of our digital transformation journey. Overall, there are 6 strategic dimensions businesses have to think about when it comes to digital and AI. And all of these are focused on one goal: creating growth and shareholder value. ADNOC's digital and AI ambitions are shaping and securing the future of our group and our contribution to the UAE. We are also capitalizing on opportunities and making sure we're also staying ahead of the curve by cultivating the workforce of the future and bringing together people, data, and technology to help enable the delivery of our 2030 strategy. Importantly, we also need to focus on how digital and AI can deliver on the business needs and support an agile, effective, and verified decision-making rubric. I'd like to conclude by sharing some of my personal observations for a post-COVID-19 world. Firstly, a technology strategy cannot be considered in isolation. It must be developed alongside key global strategic partners, such as ADNOC and the UAE. We must support and encourage R&D with partners and ecosystems that have the capability to innovate at scale to reduce the risk of technology commercialization. We also need to focus our technology strategy and investments on a few impactful platforms. We also must continue to develop the skills that underpin the successful translation of science from laboratory into manufacturing and support the free movement of highly qualified talent. And finally, we also need to design a procurement and trade policy not only to support technology, but as a mechanism for supporting industrial and government partners. This is how we at ADNOC are transforming challenges into opportunities through technology, digital, and AI. Thank you.
Wow, that was awesome, Alan. You packed an awful lot of information in just a few minutes. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions about those. Please, as I mentioned earlier, please submit your questions for Nick and Alan as soon as you can. And now we are going to start our Q&A part of the session. Joining Nick and Alan, we have Craig Hayman, CEO of AVEVA Group. We invited Craig to join us because AVEVA made a big announcement a few months ago, and we want Craig to tell us more about it. With this, Craig, would you please make some introductory remarks to get us started with the panel?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And thanks to Nick and Alan. Look, a couple of points I'd just like to punctuate is at AVEVA, we work and partner with companies like ADNOC and ExxonMobil, and we like to innovate with them, leaders like Nick and Alan. Like, I think like everyone here, we saw the world shift significantly. The way we do business has changed a lot. I mean, and also, quite frankly, we see mobility as being restricted for many more months to come. International travel these days is measured in weeks, including quarantine. It's a modern day return to transatlantic travel in 2021, taking longer than a steamship crossing 100 years ago. We see industry, energy consumption shifting to more renewables, and that creates a lot more data or intermittent. And so that brings us to OSIsoft and OSIsoft Pi systems. Look, our customers are facing the biggest challenges of our time. You want to reduce operational expense, I think we heard that here, while increasing safety, while reducing risk, while providing more certainty to capital projects. And that means more technology. And putting that in the hands of workers to, as Alan said, not to replace what they do, to assist them in what they do, and to make them more secure. And so that's data. We think of that as data. And when we looked around and we see that customers all over the world are using OSIsoft in their Pi system, the Historian. And so really you saw in Panorama from ADNOC this beautiful visualization of data. Well, some of that data is coming from the OSI soft Pi system. And so the more data you can flow into those AI algorithms that, again, you heard from Exxon and ADNOC, the better the AI is, quite frankly. More data means better recommendations and advice. So we think of this idea of artificial intelligence with good industrial data. I'm not talking about IT data, Andy. I'm not talking about desktops and PCs and things like this. I'm talking about industrial data flowing with high fidelity through AI algorithms to increase performance. We would call that performance intelligence. And so that's really what we have done over the last, we're not closed, the acquisition is not closed yet, but we saw a world in 2020 that changed faster than most companies, and certainly industrial companies, were able to take advantage of or to change themselves. Certainly that wasn't the case with Exxon, and certainly not the case with ADNOC. But they struggle, these industrial companies struggle to use the data to affect change in what they do. We saw this with PPE, with vaccinations, with the disruption in energy supply. So what AVEVA does, we invest pretty heavily, about 150 million pounds per year in research and development, about 150 scrum teams, about 10 to 12 people who innovate every 90 days in these types of scenarios to get better visibility into supply chain, to take operational cost out and improve safety. And then the final point, Andy, that we just touched on here, which is sustainability. It is an imperative. It is a business imperative to go faster. And at AVEVA, we think about this as we have our own footprint, but we're a software company. So frankly, our footprint is not that great. I mean, certainly a lot less now. We're not flying anywhere. We have our own footprint, but then we have our own handprint. And we think about that of how can we help the people who manufacture the staples of our lives, food, medicine, energy, how can we help them manufacture that with a lower footprint and bring down the temperature of the planet? We just joined the UN United Nations Global Compact because we think there's already a lot of good work that we can certainly add our voice to. So that's it, Andy. For AVEVA, we made our bet, if you like, around industrial software, as have you at ARC over many years, and it's worked out well. I think our business has tripled in the last 3 years. We really think this digitalization is really just starting to accelerate in the industrial sector. Thanks, Andy.
Well, that's great, Craig. You certainly have become the largest industrial software, independent industrial software company in our business. I see a whole bunch of questions about OPA from the audience, plus I have some, and I know it's of great interest to many folks in the audience. So I'd like to start with the question on OPA for Nick. Nick, you have certainly made a lot of investment in OPA over the years and so forth. And I think our industry, in fact, is, really waiting for some of the products to come out of OPA and so forth. Could you talk a little bit about what are some of the key success factors about OPA going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And it's a great question. OPA, when you look at critical success factors, there's obviously a technical path and technical challenges that we have to overcome, but there's also a market acceptance challenge. And in my view, the real critical success factor is the latter one. It's getting market acceptance, getting enough companies to test and ultimately deploy systems so that we create a critical mass of users that then can attract the software and compute innovation that's what ultimately really adds a lot of the value. So as I said in my earlier remarks, those first tests are going to be coming up here quite soon. We see a lot of companies currently operating test beds and doing demos, and the next wave will be putting them in plants, and that's the proof will be in the pudding there. I think once we start seeing several companies doing that, this has the potential to start snowballing, and the value will just start increasing from there as we bring software suppliers who are not traditional to this space or operating outside this space in and start adding value in their own unique ways. But I think that's really the key at this point, the key success factor. Technically, I think OPA is going to be successful. It's the market challenge is the big challenge going forward.
I agree with you. Certainly, I think we need to have a critical mass in the market. Next question here is I have for Alan. Alan, your 50-meter long digital command center is totally impressive. And I know that many other companies are either trying to build a digital dashboard or they are planning to build one, because most every company needs something, really a dashboard going forward. Could you share with the audience what are some of the lessons you learned over the years while you were building it? What sort of advice would you have for the companies who are in the process of building something like that?
Sure. Thank you, Andy. So let me start off with a bit of history. We originally developed the concept around Panorama because every time a question was getting answered, there were different answers that were being provided to that question. And all of those answers, right, in retrospect, were correct. But perhaps the asset footprint was a little bit different, or someone viewed the asset slightly differently, or maybe even some of our meters and our control systems weren't properly calibrated or necessarily tied back. So we did this initially with this view to make sure that we had the single source of truth for all of our production data, right from every single individual well all the way through into our refined products and into downstream. What we really learned, though, as a result of Panorama is we identified a number of areas of opportunity, right? So one of the first programs that we had launched on the back of Panorama was actually upgrading a number of our control systems, upgrading a number of our metering systems, et cetera, because we identified these, of course, was when you start to put Panorama together and close your mass balance and energy balance, right, as engineers we would normally do, we start to find discrepancies in that process. So that then led us down multiple paths to improve our systems, improve our reporting, improve our data flows, improve the fidelity, the integrity of our data into Panorama to ensure that we have the most robust data set. That also pointed us down a path of different operational technologies, if you will, right? Different technologies that we could go out and deploy across our assets. And today we're leveraging that even further. So as I mentioned, we effectively use Panorama as a digital twin. So we can do any number of what if scenarios around production or allocation of our products. Or we're now also looking at it from a sustainability standpoint. So not only accounting for every single hydrocarbon molecule that comes through there, but every single CO2 molecule, every single methane molecule, and every single electron that flows into the system. So I guess one of the key lessons is where we started with in that original vision is different than where we're at today. And so I think when people develop or companies consider developing a Panorama type tool, I think one of the key lessons is be flexible. You're going to learn things throughout that journey that you may not realize at the start of that journey. And you have to be willing to adapt and to address these different deficiencies. I think the second thing is partners are essential. We work very closely with Craig and with his team and a number of other partners who, without that close collaboration, none of this would have been successful. And none of us can do this alone, and partnerships are truly the backbone of any successful endeavor. And I think the third thing for me is go in with setting the right expectations for these initiatives. It's very easy to come in and say, from day one, we're going to transform the business. We're going to transform the way that we look at things. But the reality is all of this stuff does take time. So making sure that you set proper expectations up front so you know what you can deliver and when is hugely important to make sure that you get these digital and AI initiatives across the line.
Thanks,
Alan. Can I just jump? Can I, Andy, I'm sorry, can I just jump in here? Just a quick observation, because I was with you, Andy, 2 years ago, and my sort of 3 steps then was visualize the data very rapidly. And of course, that's what Alan has done. And we have since helped stand up these beautiful visualizations for not just ADNOC, but also Aramco and cities and airports, and just visualizing that data to in front of people. Then something beautiful happens. People lean into the data. They say, "That's cool. What now?" And that becomes sort of accelerates the digital transformation. And I also want to reinforce the role of standards back to OPA and, in fact, OPC. We don't talk much about OPC, but I think you have some good sessions here, Andy, about that, because of the standardizations of all of the various control systems allows that data to flow from disparate systems into one structure without ripping and replacing what is already there.
Correct. Very good comments. I think that's what Alan just talked about, bringing all the industrial data. Companies have had all the data, for so long. The problem was, unfortunately, we couldn't put this data to good value. We couldn't analyze it properly and couldn't use it when we needed it and where we needed it and so forth. My next question is to sort of all of you. Maybe we could talk about some of the challenges that you faced during the last year, while you were trying to shuffle your priorities, project priorities and so forth. And I'm sure, what did you find was some of the couple of, maybe each of you could talk about 2 really key challenges that you had to overcome. Maybe could we start with you, Nick?
Sure, just trying to find the unmute button. Yeah, let me share. Let me share one good example. As the pandemic started, I'd say we unfortunately had a lot of experience of operating facilities with reduced staff. We have a number of facilities on the Gulf Coast here in the U.S. and have dealt with hurricanes before, and we had a pandemic BCP that we went to. But I guess as the pandemic sort of dragged on, and as we saw, the business impacts then start to really take hold, and we saw, as an example in the fuels business, just dramatic demand destruction, across the globe for fuels. We were forced with operating a global fleet of refineries and having to re-optimize them for this new business reality and demand scenario, and doing that with substantially reduced staffing and even our folks that are normally in engineering centers off at home. And it was a pretty big challenge, and I was really proud of the way the teams performed of doing that work remotely, understanding how are we going to optimize the circuit, and then dealing with the reality that a lot of these run conditions were outside the normal windows where we had run in the past, and translating that into the equipment engineers to make sure that we could run in those scenarios safely and reliably, and we didn't degrade our equipment. And doing all of that remotely, as I mentioned earlier in my talk, it really sort of pushed the bounds on what we had done previously, and we leveraged a lot of new tools to work virtually, and ultimately, we look back on it, it was really exciting. I mean, it's obviously not something we want to repeat, but in terms of engineering work, it was really exciting. The teams did an awesome job. Something we're really proud of, and certainly a very unique challenge that we had never seen something quite that dramatic in a cyclical business before.
Thanks. Alan, would you have a couple of comments?
Sure, thanks, Andy. I would first start off by echoing everything that Nick said. I think everything that he described is certainly was certainly felt and experienced across the entire oil and gas industry. I mean, the challenges around really almost overnight shifting from workforce that was centrally located, certainly for us, right, centrally located here in the region, to one that was working remotely from home. That was a massive transformation, right, for all of us. And that presented some pretty unique challenges. I think one of the things, though, that we learned, Andy, throughout this whole process, and maybe this will resonate with a lot of the participants today, but when it comes to implementing a lot of the digital and AI solutions that we had to implement over the past year, and that we've implemented even over the course of time, the one thing that holds true is the soft stuff is the hard stuff, right? So when it comes to actually developing the tools and the technologies and the algorithms, identifying the different materials and the suppliers and the vendors for the different technologies, whether it's connected worker tools and technologies, or whether it's remote analysis and characterization technologies, contact tracing technologies, in many respects, developing those technologies is much, much easier than trying to get them embedded in the business on a day-to-day basis, again, to a high degree of efficiency. And I think, again, what that also taught us is we're not actually talking about a digital transformation, right? That we went through in the global pandemic and the turndown in the demand for fuels and petrochemicals, et cetera. This is a business transformation, right? That we're really going through. And that's why, in some of my earlier remarks, really just trying to stress this fact that you can't do this in isolation, right? The digital strategy, the AI strategy, your technology strategy is not standalone. It's an outgrowth of the business strategy. And again, that was one of the key learnings and one of the key hurdles that we had to overcome over the past year as well.
Excellent comments. Would you have any comments from the supplier side, Craig?
Yeah, Andy, I would say the same comment as Nick and Alan. Look, the supply chains were disrupted far faster than any company's ability to deal with that. And that forced just a massive shift in thinking. You have to accept the world as it exists, not as how you wish it would. So in oil and gas, for example, typically 90-day supply chains completely disrupted is where you ended up with nowhere to store oil when it was showing up on the shores of the United States, and reduction in prices. That's a supply chain problem. So what happened is we saw is a cultural shift inside companies where they were forced to accept that. And cloud is one example. We would often hear from our cloud businesses growing very, very rapidly. But we would often hear from sort of established companies that they don't do cloud. We don't do cloud here for a long list of reasons. And all those reasons just disappeared overnight because there was no other way to do it other than if you did the cloud. So we've stood up sort of these beautiful sort of operational walls entirely remotely with companies where they had said, no, you have to physically be here. You have to be on site to do that. And we said, look, we're not going to put our people in harm's way, and we're not going to put your people in harm's way. We're going to protect individuals. But when we found a way, some new work processes, we innovated together to protect people and also work truly digitally. I think that's my simple. So Andy, I think this was, we'll look back that this is a year that the cloud tipped to be more people doing cloud than not doing cloud.
Good point, Craig. Let's go to a question from an audience here. We have a question from a fellow from BASF. We see a lot of discussion around collection of data, more data, including tools for collection of data, analysis, visualization. However, what are companies actually doing to vet and prove the accuracy of the data? I think this question is relevant to every company out there. And maybe you folks could comment on, what are you doing, and perhaps what could be done to improve the quality of the data? With that, you go ahead. Maybe go ahead, Craig, if you have some comments.
Yeah, very, very quickly. there's a large amounts of data, and what happens is not entirely accurate, and there's gaps in that data. And when that flows into AI algorithms, it creates false positives. So meaning something, like the ignition light in your car, there's nothing wrong with it, but it costs you money to take it to the dealership to see what's wrong with it. So this idea of in artificial intelligence, being aware that you need to look for anomalies that may be false versus anomalies that are true. That we've seen a lot of innovation in that in the last 12 months. And the second final point I would say, Andy, is the data governance, data ownership. In a company such as those here, it's not just one company. You've maybe got a dozen or so operating companies with joint ownership structures, and that data is owned by different people. And so you need to protect data, not just at the user or device or plant level, but also at the ownership level. And I think we've been investing a lot in innovation around data security and data provenance, and also pinning it to the locales of a shore within a country, so that you can actually then run sort of AI, et cetera, on top of it.
Let's see, maybe Nick, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I'd kind of echo Craig's comments. Data governance is really important. As we stood up a data lake, understanding and making sure you understood and controlled what data got put into that data lake. So you started from the best, the best starting point you can, and then use the end users and applications. Ultimately have to address it, because your data will never be perfect.
Alan.
Yeah, Andy, I would just add, as an engineer, right, we're always taught to trust but verify. And so for me, when it comes to the data quality piece of it, it's really going out and triangulating that data. So if you've got a data point, as Craig, described as being, either detected through AI algorithms or some any other means, we have to get in there and interrogate that data, right, to understand why that data or why that number is not what we may have expected. And the best way to do that is to measure essentially that same stream, that same process, that same temperature, that same pressure, using multiple sensors. So now you can start to hone in on, is it a sensor issue? Is it a detection issue? Is it a true anomaly? What's actually driving that value in that data, and what's driving, potentially that outlier, that particular behavior in that data. So for me, it comes back to fundamentals, right? Things that we all learned in day one, which is make sure you go in, trust but verify that data, triangulate that data, close your mass balances, close your energy balances, because at the end of the day, if you can do that, more times than not, you're going to guarantee yourself that you have a high fidelity data.
Good, thanks. Alan, stay there. I have another question for you here from an audience. The connected worker observations from ADNOC are very strong. Which approach do you see as the fastest path to success?
Yeah, so we very rapidly deployed a number of connected worker solutions, everything from say IT-based solutions, whether it was Microsoft 365 or Teams, right, to keep the workforce connected on a daily basis and keep us all communicating, to actually, having remote glasses and remote analysis tools where we could send in less skilled workers into our sites. And again, that's primarily driven because, the experts couldn't travel. They weren't allowed to get on airplanes, come in and actually physically see our equipment themselves. So we had to innovate, right? And again, working with partners, we brought in a number of different tools where we could send people in to our assets and then real time send that data, send that imagery, send the analysis in many instances back to those experts. And to me, that was hugely enabling, because without that, we would have been in a situation where we would have had to do our own troubleshooting across our sites and relying on our own expertise, which again, we wouldn't be able to tap into the global experts, the equipment manufacturers, the suppliers, the catalyst providers, et cetera, across our sites. So to me, that was hugely important. And again, today, we're seeing the continued deployment and use of all of those technologies across our sites because the value now has been realized.
Thanks.
Andy, can I just add on to that, because we've seen exactly the same dynamic. It was I quickly mentioned it in my earlier comments, but there were instances where those type of tools and rapidly getting those tools up and going had huge impacts. I mean, early in the pandemic, people will remember Italy being in essentially a complete lockdown. And we had projects where we needed to go do factory acceptance testing at shops in Italy. Well, it wasn't a situation of, well, maybe we won't send the right people. It was like, you're not sending anyone. There was no option to get in there. And the teams were able to, using some of the tools like Alan just mentioned, do it remotely. And it's something that normally we would probably put 4 or 5 engineers on a plane to do that. And we did it here from Spring, Texas, with cameras and data transfers. And it's one of those cases where, absent COVID, I'm not sure we would have taken that bold of a step, right? And I think if you look for a sort of a silver lining in the whole COVID situation, some of that push that it gave us all, I think we'll look back and see that as a positive, one of the few positives that's come out of this.
Okay, next stay there. I have a question here about OPA from an audience here. A lot of the early OPA standards work seem to be focused on hardware protocols. But it seems the value will be unleashed by software going forward. How do you see that playing out right now?
Yeah, I mean, a really good observation. Certainly a lot of the focus in the standards right now is getting the hardware standards and the communication standards hammered out, because ultimately that's what creates the ability to bring the end users or the innovators on the compute side in. In terms of the suppliers, we see a large number of suppliers engaged in the forum. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, the attraction for them will be to have a critical mass of users and a growing critical mass of users to then service customers. So there'll be an aspect of that as OPA grows and we start seeing deployments, I think we'll see that interest and engagement grow over time. But right now we see quite a bit of interest. I think folks understand the value proposition and it's going to attract folks that are out, non-typical software suppliers that we don't see in our industry come in and once they see the opportunity. So yeah, I think right now the progress looks really good. We've seen a lot of interest, and as we go on, it's the proof will be in the pudding.
Thanks. I have a question here about IT/OT integration. One of the key topics, obviously, we have been discussing this at these forums for many years now, IT/OT integration, both from people, process, technology perspective. How are you approaching IT/OT convergence from technology perspective? Maybe you could start with Nick. IT/OT, how are you working with your IT folks? And then we'll go to Alan and we'll ask him other way around.
Yeah, we have some work going on, what we call next gen IT/OT, to look at simplifying and that interface and bringing more compute power in, and kind of in the middle of that effort. I think it's important to bring the compute capability into closer to the plants. And right now that's a pretty big hurdle from a data latency standpoint and access to data standpoint. So a big focus area both in the OPA program as well as next gen IT/OT.
Thanks. Alan, would you make some comments, please?
Yeah, I would echo what Nick had said. I mean, we're looking at this with a strategic project as well, right? Trying to understand the interface and between IT, OT, and I'd even just broaden it into the area of, say, traditional R&D, right? The product and process R&D, because we're actually seeing a convergence of all three, where, once upon a time, IT was almost standalone, OT or digital were standalone, and then the product and process R&D elements were standalone. We're really seeing a blurring across all of those three areas today. So, I think one of the key opportunities, or one of the key things you need to do to start off, is make sure we've got clearly defined roles and responsibilities across those three areas. So you can come in and delineate from an IT perspective, what are those capabilities, what are those skills, what are those requirements, the systems, the processes that need to be delivered. Same thing again on the OT side, same thing again on the traditional R&D side of things as well. Because all of these things actually converge when you start talking about implementing new technology across your assets. So I'd say it's still, for us, much like Nick had communicated, it's a work in progress for us. But it certainly is an area that we're focusing on to make sure that we do get this right for future technology deployment.
Thanks.
Andy, I would add here this point of IT and OT convergence, because let's just call it out here. SolarWinds was a punch on the nose to the tech industry. And so let's just call out for a second. Really, what is the most value is, I've changed my video, it's gone a bit weird. Sorry about that. Most value is has been applying cheap, highly scalable cloud and technologies, large horizontal technologies into the OT environment. So that has a dramatic amount of value. The following step, which is to connect IT and OT, is one I think that was still several steps away because of all of the security points. And let's just remember that these facilities are running for 10, 20, 30, 40 years and have outlived many of the technologies that certainly I've seen in my career here. So we have to find a way to use the specialization of the industrial sector from the OT environment, certification, that's where some of these standards work great, use horizontal capability at scale, but be sure that we have control over these systems that are really quite critical to the world.
Good, thanks. I have a question here for Alan. Can Panorama Command Center be distributed to the virtual workforce and so forth? Maybe how do you bring that information all the way to the people out in the field, Alan?
Right. So, Panorama being our single source of truth for all of our process data, right? From our wells in through the production side, refining, processing into marketing and trading. Obviously, we keep all of that collective data in a highly secured facility. So there's actually only a small number of people that can access that data in its totality at any given point in time. Now, of course, there are bits and pieces, elements of that data that, of course, from an operations standpoint, a business standpoint, an asset management standpoint, that people have access, again, to the various data streams that pertain to their particular asset. But as it pertains in a total, again, that's very secure and for us, obviously, very confidential information. But the one thing that we also overlaid with Panorama is multi-layer authentication and multiple layer security, so that even through the COVID situation, our most senior management, our CEO, our executive leadership team, were able to access that data to ensure business continuity, even through the pandemic, through remote working, et cetera. So again, the key aspect, for Panorama is that data integrity, the data security, and we maintain that at all costs. So we don't distribute Panorama and that data across all of our sites in total. But again, obviously there's different elements that businesses need to have access to in order to run their day-to-day businesses and their day-to-day operations.
Nick, I have a question for you here. You emphasize the fact that most companies tend to overestimate risks and underestimate value from technology. Mm-hmm. Are there any technologies that you have recently adopted that perhaps you are hesitant? What are some of the new technologies perhaps now you start feeling comfortable bringing them into the plant?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't characterize it as hesitant. I think it's really a rate and pace discussion. And you know, as an example, I'll use Smart Lane, which I talked about, you know, in the presentation, which is this operator guidance tool to help guide an operator through a transient event like a grade switch on a reactor. You know, that we worked on it for about 2 years, and we deployed it, you know, pretty pervasively across our polymer plants this year. And now that it's, you know, we've successfully deployed it and seen the value live, you know, we're rapidly replicating that in other platforms. But you know, when you look at that, it's sort of the natural discussion that you have on any new technology. And you know, we've got 36 chemical and refining plants that were potential use cases for this. And you get the questions around, well, is the value really going to be there when the program's in its early stage? And is the value really going to be what you say it is? And then there's the very real questions about risk. You know, is this tool going to guide an operator to take the unit somewhere we don't want it to go? And you have to work to you know, understand that value, which my view is that you never truly do until you get it, you know, deployed and on the ground. And you have to work through the risk. And when I say we tend to underestimate the risk, I'm not trying to trivialize risk. There is real risk with new technologies. But I think as we go through those, you know, it's a lesson for us, particularly in a large company with lots of operating facilities. And I think Alan sort of made this point earlier of getting the sites comfortable enough to go and deploy it. You know, my view is that if I look back on that one, we probably could have done it faster. Am I upset about the rate that we did it? No. But I think as we understand, and then we see cases like right now in COVID, where we had an artificial perturbation that pushed us on pace on some things, it sort of illustrates, wow, you know, we can actually go quite a bit faster when we change sort of our paradigm. So, you know, that would be one, you know, that I spoke to there. I mean, I think the other dynamic that we run into in industry is there are a lot of what I'll call foundational kind of technologies and capabilities that you put in place that enable digital. So, you know, pervasive Wi-Fi in your plant would be one, establishing data lakes would be one. And often when you're doing those, they're fairly substantial investments, and the credits and the use cases aren't necessarily entirely clear. And I think organizations tend to struggle with that, and it slows down some of those more foundational technologies. I really enjoyed listening to Alan's talk on Panorama, and he emphasized, you know, like the use case and benefit they saw on COVID and managing the COVID outbreak. I'll let Alan answer, but my guess is probably when they were talking about Panorama, they weren't envisioning that as a particular use case. And, you know, COVID wasn't on any of our radar screens. And so you see the value. You have to go back to are the fundamentals of value there, you know, and you know, the analogy is an OPA. We see the fundamentals of leveraging and making innovation much more rapid in a space where you know you can add a lot of value by putting compute closer to the plants. And you sort of have to, you know, take that on a little bit of faith. If you think you're going to lay out every single use case and do super detailed economics, you know, they're going to be wrong. And sometimes you just have to get over it. But I think COVID was a good way that, you know, something beyond our control forced us to sort of, I think it forced most companies to test their limits on what they could do.
Thanks.
Andy, if I could just add a couple of comments. Again, I think Nick summarized it very well. You know, the way I see it, there's kind of two sides of this coin. There's the risk side, right? And all new technologies carry some amount of risk. But as risk can be mitigated, risk can be identified. So as long as you're going in with your eyes open with new technology, and you do the what if scenario planning around technology deployment and say, if this happens, then I would do this. And if this happens, then I would do this. You can create that matrix by which you can manage that risk and do so proactively, right? Because you don't want to do that assessment when the technology is being implemented and you have something unexpected happens, because that's you don't know how to respond. and that could actually drive the wrong behaviors, right? You could do something actually to make that situation worse. So you have to go in and do a proper risk assessment on any new technology. The other side of it, though, and Nick touched on this as well, is the value discussion. And we all look at technology deployment through the value lens, whether that's detailed discount cash flow and NPV calculations or IRR, et cetera. I'm sure all of us, here on the panel, as well as almost everyone that's listening to this discussion, probably have some financial metric or some financial hurdle that you have to prove in order to invest in a technology. And the reality is, sometimes you just have to place bets. And Panorama, looking back to for us, to some degree, was a bit of a bet that we placed. We didn't know that Panorama would, and the capabilities and the data science and the algorithms that we developed as part of Panorama would ever be used for a global pandemic. But the value that created in terms of ensuring business continuity was absolutely paramount, right? I mean, tremendous amount of value that created. So sometimes these projects may not look that great on paper up front because it's hard to articulate where they're going to go in the future. But again, I think what COVID also taught us is sometimes you just need to place a bet.
Excellent. Alan, I know you didn't only place your bets on the Panorama, you also placed bets on, I would say, ADNOC Go, blockchain, and so forth. Maybe I think I'm really very interested in Amazon, ADNOC Go. That's the kind of sort of thing Amazon, I know they are testing that type of stores and so forth, but it seems like you're already doing it. Could you make a few comments about your, ADNOC Go as well as actually use of blockchain?
Sure. So, ADNOC Go for us is really capitalizing on this concept of innovating where the market ends. You can go to a convenience store, you can go to a grocery store, and you can buy your can of Coca-Cola and your Snickers bar and your M&Ms, and you can still do that today, right? Even though ADNOC Go stations are being deployed. But the real attractiveness with ADNOC Go is if I go into a convenience store, I may end up standing in line for 10 minutes, right? As other people are paying for their fuel or other people are buying other goods, et cetera. The ADNOC Go concept, again, is really innovating where that market ends. And the market that we're going after are those people that want a very quick, rapid transaction. They don't have 10 minutes to stand in the grocery store or C-store. They have 30 seconds, so they can walk in, walk out without even flashing their credit card. And that opens up a whole new market for us, because many times, if you don't have 10 minutes to go to the stores, you're just simply not going to go. So again, it's this concept of really trying to unlock a market that is otherwise inaccessible. And that was really that philosophy around ADNOC Go. But Andy, for us, when we start looking at the whole portfolio of options and scenarios, and again, this kind of ties back to my earlier comments about the value piece of it, we don't necessarily assess our projects. Well, let me correct myself. We do assess our projects on a project by project basis, but to be successful, you have to look at this as an overall portfolio. And portfolios will have risk, and some projects in that portfolio will be successful and others will not. As long as that overall portfolio is successful, at the end of the day, that's the most important thing, and that's what's going to drive long-term value.
Yeah, but that's a great way to look at it.
I totally agree with Alan. I mean, the portfolio view is really important, and if you don't have programs that fail, it just means we're not doing anything new, right? And a lot of us that are trained as engineers have a hard time, grasping that concept. We want everything to work, but it really is important in the innovation space. It's got to be a portfolio, and you're going to have successes and failures, and it's the success of the portfolio that's really important.
Excellent. And you have any comment to add to that, Craig? If you do, please feel free. You're on mute. Yeah.
Thank you. My comment is probably more of a cultural point, which is in the companies that we work with, which is thousands of companies, the change they have gone through in the last 12 months is astonishing. I think they've surprised themselves. their employees have surprised themselves how much they can bear change. It's way above what they thought it was. And so now we're at a point of many of them, they want to continue that rate and pace of change, of transformation, of improvement, of driving higher performance without increasing risk, reducing operational expense, more certainty around capital projects. They want to maintain that. They don't really want to go back, but they're worried that their organizations are going to snap them back to well, we don't do that here. That's not what we do here. And that's a sort of the more of the cultural point. And so for me, at AVEVA, we've centered on two things: results and learning. Be aggressive on results, drive the best results you can drive, but also be aggressive on learning. And I know that sort of back to this point of the engineer in all of us is look at the problem and what can you improve out of it? And that I think goes across the operational footprint. And look, we're not talking about small companies here on this panel. These are very large companies with large global footprints dealing in a very changed world. But it's going to take people to affect the change, to take advantage of and to operate in that changed world.
Thanks. I have here an interesting question from the audience. Could you share some examples? What sort of work you have successfully moved away from plants? I guess the remote locations, and maybe perhaps the person is asking, you're trying to build some new centers of excellence. Maybe obviously, Alan's Panorama is a good example of center of excellence or something. Maybe could you please talk a little bit about if you are successfully moved some work away from plants? Maybe Nick, do you have any?
Yeah, sure. I'll share a few examples, and I'll context it as it's not just moving work away from plants. It's sometimes doing work that you didn't previously do at the plants that you can leverage by having all the data utilized by a single group in a single location looking across the fleet. One of the areas I mentioned earlier, like if you take our downstream and chemicals business, 36 refineries and chem plants around the world, that's a huge deployed fleet of plants. And we see a lot of value in getting collective insights from that whole fleet versus each plant doing its own thing. And so I mentioned in my talk, we have a technical center in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. We have what we call a process monitoring group there that actively monitors all of our processes, chemicals and refining around the world. The folks doing that are actually part of the business teams at those particular plants. So they do real-time monitoring and prep for like the morning reports and the discussion at shift change in the morning on the units. So that's an example of, you could say some of that work was done in the sites and then we moved to Malaysia, but a lot of that work, we're doing things that weren't previously done at our sites, like looking for fleet trends, benchmarking real time how various pieces of equipment are operating relative to one another across the fleet. If you go back several years, we didn't have that capability. We have a machinery monitoring group there as well, monitoring right now critical machines. So we have about 200 of our critical machines around the world being monitored, and that team is doing proactive failure detection. They've been up and running for about a year now. They've got a number of big saves, and we're expanding that, similar to what Alan talked about in their predictive maintenance track. We'll be at about 400 critical machines at the end of this year and about 1,000 pumps. But we're seeing value there. That's again work that was done at the sites. So some of that work scope was moved from the sites to a centralized location, but there's also, if you look at the scope of what we do there now, it goes well beyond what we were doing at the sites. And another example would be equipment strategy work. We have some of that activity going on as well. I mean, I guess one of the things we've learned in like those 3 work tracks, you have to make sure that your actual, when you move work, you have to make sure your actual base performance and fundamental performance is solid, because trying to move work and centralize work before you've got that squared away, is not a recipe for success. So sometimes the movement of work gets all of the sort of the attention. There's a lot of base fundamentals that you have to have squared away before you can do that.
Excellent. Well, this is a great discussion, and certainly I think we can continue this for a long time, but unfortunately our time is up and we have to close this session now. Again, I want to mention to you folks that all presentations will be available on this platform for next 3 months. You can come back at any time to listen to them again. Let's now give a big hand to our panelists. Again, I want to thank you, and Nick, Alan, and Craig for being with us today. Please provide us your feedback about this session by rating the session on the forum app. We are now going to take a 30-minute break, and we will have another one of these sessions in 30 minutes. Thank you very much for joining us.